Okay, so I think it's recording. I'll try. Sem problema, qualquer um, Yuri. Qualquer um deles, é tudo igual. So today I'll try to speak a little bit louder because I forgot my microphone. So we are going to discuss today David Crystal, English as a global language, compared with Robert Phillipson, linguistic imperialism. Okay, and we'll try to establish a parallel between these two authors, their different positions. I recorded a class on David Crystal, English as a Global Language. It's class 17. It's on the channel on YouTube. Okay, since we missed the class because of my other appointment in Santa Quitéria, I recorded a class for you. Okay. Now, both Crystal and Phillipson, they discuss this English as a global language, or as Phillipson prefers, as a kind of new colonial language. Okay, and they investigate the reasons for these languages becoming global, the political factors, the historical factors that contributed to the spread of English all over the world. And one of the questions that we have is, why do we need a global language? Why is a global language necessary? Well, it's known by most of you that not everyone has a linguistic unity as we have in Brazil. Although in Brazil we speak different varieties of Portuguese, we all speak Portuguese. In the south, in the north, in the northeast, in the southeast. That's not exactly what happens in countries, for example, like India, like South Africa, or like Nepal. So, why do we need a global language? First of all, to unite people. This is, let's say, the positive point of view, the optimistic point of view. A global language would make people get together, construct a relationship through this language. Okay, so the tribe languages that separate people could keep existing, but they would give place in certain moments to a global language, or to a more general language, at least shared by a bigger number of people. And that's exactly what happens in South Africa, where English is a national language. Although, if you walk on the street, you may hear people speaking a language you will not understand, because they're speaking their tribe language. In India, that's the same. As you know, I had a professor from India, and he said that it was impossible to understand some people from India. He was from India, but he couldn't understand other people from India, from a different ethnic group, because he didn't speak their language. They speak a tribe language in certain contexts. And in some other contexts, English is spoken. For example, in school, in the media, in the official newspapers, so on. So the interpreter is not enough anymore. In the world we live in, the interpreter has a very difficult role, because we need fast communication. We need to communicate quickly, and the interpreter is one more step in the process of communication. So the interpreter must be eliminated, or it's desirable that it is eliminated from the process of communication. Because we need to be quickly and mutually intelligible to each other. Okay? And in this case, that's why I chose to bring you the commercial with Joel Santana. When Joel Santana was the coach of the South African team, he used to give interviews, and many people in Brazil used to criticize him because his English was not good, but he was able to communicate. And the fact that he was able to communicate is proved by the fact that he could instruct his players. And they could play the way Joel wanted them to play. So, there is a lot of prejudice. Do you understand prejudice? Preconceito? There's a lot of prejudice considering the non-native speaker of English. And this kind of prejudice is going to be one of the objects of discussion for this class today. What Joel speaks can be named a pidgin language. What is a pidgin? A pidgin, have you ever heard about pidgins and creoles? Yeah? A pidgin is a language of contact. Okay? It's a hybrid language in which the syntax of one language is predominant, the lexicon of one language is predominant, but there are elements of another or other languages. It's a mixed up language. It's almost Tosca English that we fool around here with Tosca English, but Tosca English is nothing but a pidgin of Portuguese and English. And you are able to communicate through that. And sometimes you think you are inventing words, and when you go to the dictionary, you are surprised because those words actually exist.
When they try to create a version that is targeted language using the same structure they use in the mother language and
It is not a pidgin until it is used in real communication. When it's used in real communication, then you can call it a pidgin.
Sometimes I shouldn't have some data that instead of saying I'm worried, he said I'm
preoccupied.
No, it was agreed. He's trying to say I agree. He said I concord, and George should be something to understood it.
And I'm not sure, but I think the word concord does exist in English. Yeah, it's not used, but it's there. But anyway, when he's talking to you in a natural situation, trying to communicate something, you can call it a pidgin. But let's put it this way: it's the beginning of a pidgin, because a pidgin needs users. It needs a community. To be a pidgin, it cannot be like that. Oh, I'm going to invent a mixed up language that I will speak with Yuri only. This is not a pidgin. But when a group, a considerable number of people start sharing this vocabulary, this structure, then you can call it a pidgin. That's what happened, for example, in Brazil, when the Portuguese arrived here and mixed up Portuguese with Tupi. When they started using words from Tupi inside the grammar of Portuguese.
And the difference about the and the
I'll get to that point in a minute. Okay? So a pidgin is like, for example, Portunhol. Portunhol is a pidgin and it's actually used. If you go to Paraguay, especially in those cities in which commerce of the muamba is very intense, you see that people from Paraguay incorporate words from Portuguese, and also that we Brazilians try to speak their language, try to speak at least what we think their language is in order to be understood. And there is a process of negotiation of meaning, and when this meaning is successfully negotiated and you can be intelligible, mutually intelligible, then you have a pidgin. Now, Yuri came up with a question. Can we call it a creole? Well, a creole is what happens, for example, in the borders of Brazil and Paraguay, Brazil and Argentina, with those people from regions of the border. when their children are born, they are born listening to their parents speaking a pidgin. But they don't participate in creating this pidgin. They acquire the pidgin, and now the pidgin is a Creole.
The people who live in frontier,
Yeah, let's put it this way. A pidgin is the first step for a Creole. A pidgin may become a Creole or not. It will depend on a series of factors. The need of its use, its success as a contact language. But a Creole is a language of people who are born inside a context of a pidgin. When you have a pidgin and then you have children and they will listen to that pidgin and use it, they are starting to make it a Creole language. A Creole is the second generation of a pidgin. It's not created, it's learned. Whereas a pidgin is negotiated, is created, a Creole is learned. A Creole is learned, or better, it's acquired. Yes.
the pidgin is the first point about the language.
Yeah, it's the starting point of the Creole. Okay, what we have in Haiti, Haiti in Central America is a Creole of French. Necessarily, the first French who got in touch with the natives in Haiti and with the Negroes that were brought from Africa to Haiti, they spoke a pidgin language. The sons and daughters of those slaves and even of those slave masters spoke a Creole. And the Creole of French is the official language of Haiti. They don't have French as their official language. Their official language is the Creole. Okay, it's called Creole. Okay, French Creole. So, but as you can see, when you mix up languages, this mixing is not 50%, 50%. There is a matter of power involved. And the nation who's more powerful will have a kind of predominance over the nation who's less powerful in the composition of this pidgin. Okay, so for example, the essential grammar, the essential lexicon of the way Joel speaks his kind of pidgin language. That's not a pidgin language, but it's, let's say, a caricatural example of a pidgin. Okay, the way he speaks is predominantly related to English, although Portuguese is inserted. Okay, why? Because English is the language of a hegemonic nation, the United States, and even before England, both were hegemonic. Okay, so there is a lot to do concerning language and power involving pidgin and Creoles. Okay. If you take Latin, for example, Latin was also this language we call a lingua franca. Okay, but don't be illuded. The people who spoke Latin and who conquered other nations were not those who spoke the Latin of Homero or any other famous writer from the classics. They spoke vulgar Latin, and this vulgar Latin was mixed up with Celtic, with Galego, and so on. Okay, and it incorporated some words, but of course the grammar who prevailed, the grammar that kept being used, was the grammar of Latin. And this is valid even for English. English is born as a pidgin, and then as a Creole. English is not a pure language. I think no modern language nowadays is a pure language. If you take English, it has Germanic roots, it has Nordic roots, it has a Latin grammar. If you pay attention to the grammar of English, it follows the same syntactic order of Portuguese: subject, verb, complement, object, direct, indirect. Okay? English was somehow Latinized. When it became the official language of England, it lacked a grammar. And people who wrote the grammars were deeply influenced by the Latin tradition. Do you understand me? So, as Latin was the language of knowledge, the language of culture, taking culture as high culture, Latin was the role model for the majority of modern languages we have nowadays. The same happened to French, the same happened to, I'm not saying German because I know almost anything, I know almost nothing of German, but the same happened to Italian, Portuguese, Spanish. You're going to say, okay, but these are Latin languages. Yeah, but I think English is the most remarkable case of a non-Latin language that was Latinized. Okay? Because it was the language of the church, because it was the language of great poetry, because it was the language of a strong and hegemonic tradition. Okay? Any questions about this? So when you have a pidgin, you have asymmetries. And these asymmetries between societies are reproduced in the asymmetries between these languages. Okay? And that's completely Foucaultian. Yeah? You have differences in power, so you have differences in language. Language is political. There is a lot of political concerning language. Language is 101% politics. Do you follow Marcos Banho on Facebook? Have you taken a look at Marcos Banho? You know who he is, yeah? Marcos Banho has a Facebook page, and he has a kind of acid humor. And his positioning in Facebook is even better than his positioning in the classroom. Because he says in Facebook he's free to say whatever he wants. And he was discussing the matter of presidente versus presidenta. And then he said, okay, I know that semiologically, that morphologically, presidenta does not exist. But language is not only semiology, it's not only morphology, it's not only syntax. Language is identity, language is culture, language is history, and language is changeable. And the ones who can change language are those who speak it. And I want to change it. And I want to create the word presidenta. And for me, that is representative that we have a woman occupying this position and not a man. As you can see, we are taking the English language here from a political perspective. Yeah? And we see that politics reflect in the way languages get mixed up to form new languages. So although Latin was known by some people in the dominated nations, not everybody spoke Latin. Just a few spoke Latin. But a few who were able to be the mediators of the contact between dominators and dominated. Okay? So Latin was not spoken by, for example, everyone in the Italy Peninsula or by everyone in the Iberic Peninsula. But it was spoken by those of a higher level, a higher cultural and intellectual level. Please take culture as having formal knowledge. Those who had instruction and that could dominate others. So if you take a pyramid, Latin was spoken by those at the top of the pyramid in their dominated societies. And those in the top of the pyramid were the mediators with those who were colonizing them. So it's a pyramid inside another pyramid. Okay, I'll try to make a drawing. Vamos ver. Quem colonizava? Relação, soldado. Vinha aqui, dominava esse. E esse aqui se encarregava do resto. Fazia mediação. Okay? That's why we say we speak a language. That's why we say we speak a language that derives from vulgar Latin. Our language is not derived from classic Latin, but from the Latin spoken by the soldiers. Those who got in touch with the top of the pyramid and dominated them. If you want to dominate a nation, the first thing you gotta do is dominate its leaders. You have ways of dominating, and Phillipson will talk about that. You can dominate by guns or by gifts, by seduction. You can seduce. Yeah. And I think English, in the case of Latin America, especially, taking the situation of the United States nowadays, they are not interested in dominating with guns anymore. Not in the case of Latin America. Their interest is to dominate by seduction. Take a look at what they do in Cuba. Yeah? The radio stations from Miami making political propaganda of the American way of life. Come to the United States and you have opportunity, we'll take you as a refugee and so on. Okay? So the point is not entering militarily in a country. Although they have been doing this in the Middle East, in Iraq, in Afghanistan, but this is not so effective, and this is kind of traumatic for both sides. So they have been avoiding this, and you can see this on the news. Obama has retired the army from Iraq. Yeah. So this seems to be the case of English in Brazil. Who speaks English in Brazil? Socially speaking, who is the social stratification? Who is the social slice of the pyramid who speak English? Yeah, the middle classes, the middle and upper classes. Don't expect a poor child from Coroadinho to speak English. Of course, he or she will, if they have the opportunity. But the problem is, where is the opportunity? Who should give the opportunity? Who is responsible to give the opportunity for learning a language? Ideally, who is the one, what institution is the institution responsible for teaching languages in Brazil? The state. The school. The school is part of the state. But in Brazil, is English a foreign language or a second language? Foreign language. If you don't understand very well the difference between foreign language and second language, please check out class 17 on YouTube. But I'll give you a brief explanation. When we treat English as a second language, we have a state policy, we have a state program to teach it. We have the state intervention in teaching this language not only for reading and reading, especially reading in Brazil, and not even writing. We don't even teach writing in English in the public schools in Brazil. We only teach its reading. So this is the foreign language policy. The second language policy is when you have a policy, when you have a political agenda of teaching a language in its four abilities: speaking, writing, listening, and reading. This is not the case in Brazil. If you take a look at the PCNs, you will see that what we teach here is what they call ESP. English for specific purposes. Also known as inglês instrumental. But not even this has been successful. And why not? Because this is a discussion that has been carried inside this university. We haven't been able to form you as English teachers. And this is true, and we have to take it. We have to face this. We haven't been able to teach you how to be English teachers. Because we have been teaching you the beabá. And by teaching you the beabá, we are making an option not to teach you social linguistics of English, not to teach you morphosyntax of English in the level of detail you must know to be English teachers. So this is a very complex chain of factors that must be changed. But who does this change? Who is responsible for changing this? Again, the state. The state must have a policy. And English is not our second language, it's our foreign language. Which means we are going to teach English in the public schools for reading only, for knowing how to identify keywords, and how to have a general meaning of texts. And not only English, but it's optional. You can opt out for Spanish or French. And we know we teach none of the three. We teach notions, very basic notions of each of these three languages. Try to get a text in English, give it to a student from the third year of high school in Brazil, and ask him to tell you what the text talks about. From a public school or even from a private school. There is a policy in Brazil, and it's not an official policy, but it's a belief. Let's change the word policy for a belief. There is a belief, a current belief among English teachers, what is worse, that it's impossible to teach English in the school. Do you agree with me? Estou fugindo muito da realidade. Não existe essa crença de que é impossível ensinar inglês na escola. And I'm not talking about public school. I'm not talking about only public schools. I'm talking about official teaching. Ensino regular. Be it private or public.
Você pega o ensino médio, por exemplo. Você tem um livro que vai para você dar aula de present perfect, por exemplo. É difícil você aliar o currículo à currícula.
Yeah, first of all, there are many factors, and if you read the complaints in works on discourse analysis, you have been reading, uh, teachers complain of many things about the few hours to work, about the content, about the material conditions they have to work. There are a lot of factors, but the worst of all these factors is the belief that it's impossible.
Mas mesmo, por exemplo, se é um professor diferente, então você está fazendo a mesma metodologia que um curso de inglês, que é tentativa, na escola regular, nós não temos.
Yeah, and we are going to talk about it. First of all, the PCNs are organized. They don't tell you that you have to teach grammar points, but our tradition is so close to teaching grammar and not teaching the language, because grammar is one aspect of the language, that we stick to grammar points. First, I'm going to teach to be, then I'm going to teach simple present, and after simple present, I'll teach present continuous. After that, I'll teach the simple past, and so on, and so on, and so on. And then you structure the dialogues on the grammar points, when it must be exactly the opposite. We must work with real texts from Time Magazine, from the New York Times, from scientific publications, taking the ESP perspective, and ask students to identify meaning. Instead of concentrating in meaning, in semantics, we have been concentrating on syntax, on morphology. But how can you teach the morphology of a language to someone who does not know that language? We had faced the situation, yes, Wallison. We have this problem. Every semester we have this problem with some students that are not proficient in English, but they have to take morphosyntax. And how can they understand the morphosyntax of a language that they do not know? This is a big problem, and we have to make an option. Are we going to teach the language or about the language? If we're going to teach the language, then we must lose any illusion that we are going to teach social linguistics, morphosyntax, and so on. And we are going to teach the language forever. If we are going to teach about the language, we have to make our student conscious that when he or she comes here, he will listen to a talk in English. He will write his papers in English. So English is a requisite. It's not the object of the teaching. It's the medium of teaching. Well, but this is my positioning. We have been discussing that in the colegiado. We haven't a decision yet, but thank God the things are progressing. I can tell you that things are in a progressive movement. Thank God. Professor Nayara agrees with me in a lot of things about this. Gino too. So we hope to have some progress. Not the ideal curriculum, but a better curriculum for you in no time. If not for you, for those who are coming in the next generations. But I'd like to go back to this case here in Brazil. So in Brazil, English is a foreign language. English is treated as a foreign language, and so is French, and so is Spanish. What does it mean? The state is not compromised by the law. It's in the law that the state does not have any compromise with teaching the four abilities, with teaching, especially speaking and listening. It's not our focus in high school. And even in the university, if you go to my English instrumental class in biblioteconomia, what I teach them is how to recognize some cognate words, some structures, some verb tenses, how to construct a general meaning. But there's no listening exercise, there's no speaking exercise, because this is not part of the program. In computing science, we can do that. In computing science, I gave an exam that had listening. I got a video tutorial about some computing matters from YouTube. I played the video tutorial, and there were questions about what they listened in the video. So, what is the big difference between biblioteconomia and ciência da computação? Why do they? It's not in the program too, okay? But I could do because I had human resources. Eu tinha um material humano bem trabalhado o suficiente para dar listening naquela sala. What happens? What is so different about CCSO and CT? Why is it possible to speak English in the class in CCSO? In CT, I can give a whole class in English, and sometimes here in CCH I can't.
Because the people all the time see the word.
This is one possibility. They work with the computer all the time, and English is the dominant language in science and technology. But this is one side of the coin. They are supposed to know English too, and they don't.
Maybe I don't know, maybe because people have more to learn the music from the
Yeah, that's right. It's all about money. It's all about economics, economic condition. We have those labels we put in the courses: curso de rico, curso de pobre. Of course, there are people who have a lot of money studying here in CCH. And the opposite is also true. There are poor students in CT. But the majority is of people who had a social background that made it possible for them to have access to English in institutions other than formal school. And this is what I want to honestly discuss with you, because I do not have, as Joel Santana says, I do not have a stick tail. Não tenho rabo preso. Né? What is the problem? Who's in charge of teaching the 4 abilities in Brazil? English courses that are public. They are private. So what do they think about first? If you have a company in a capitalist country, you come up with a company, you invest your capital, what do you want back? Money, profit. So English in Brazil is a product to be sold. It's a product that you buy. And if you pay attention to the TV commercials, or to those commercials you see on the bus, aprenda a falar inglês em 8 semanas. Inglês fluente, eles não vendem mais nem o inglês, é o inglês fluente em 8 semanas. You don't buy the knowledge. You buy the fluency. But what the hell is fluency? Fluency is very subjective. I had a student who was fluent in English, only putting Asian after the words. Joel Santana is fluent. If you take the perspective that speaking a language is being able to communicate, to build up your meaning, Joel Santana was able to tell the team to attack, to defend, to put 4 men on the defense line, to put 3 at the front, and and he could communicate, so he was fluent. So when you buy your fluency, you're buying a subjective product. What you call fluency, I may not call. But anyway, So I wanted to pay attention to the fact that in Brazil, English is in the hands of corporations, of businessmen, and not of educators. And businessmen and businesswomen, yeah, to be honest, to be politically correct, and to give you a more consistent example. Any of you will paint the picture you want in your brains, okay? But we come to the absurd situation that I had a colleague when I worked in a public high school. Okay, this is a story about when I worked in public high school. Don't make confusion. I worked in a public high school, and I had a colleague who had a school, and she told her students that it was impossible to teach for those bunch of students, 35 students. So she was so nice that having a private school, she gave them a discount in her institution. Of course, I'm talking about when I worked in São Paulo in a public school, okay? So she gave them a discount. Behind this is the fact that she's recruiting clients. 50% of the money, yes, but 50% is better than nothing. It's better than giving it for free in a public school, which means no profit at all. And then you have your salary from the state, and you have your profit in your company. So I think it's very conflicting, a very conflicting situation. Because of course, if I had a company, I would tell my students that my company is better than what they have for free from the state. I'm not being ironic, okay? Please don't take me like that. Well, so when does English start its spread? As you can see, then there is what I want you to reflect about is that there is a deep relationship between English and capital, English and money. If you want to make money, you gotta speak English, okay? And if you don't believe that, start paying attention in all the TV commercials for English schools you see. English is always represented as the language of those who have the money, who have the power, who have the influence over others. Okay? So this process of representing English started after the 50s, when a certain number of institutions gained importance. The World Bank, not by chance the first institution I mentioned, bank, the UNESCO, the UNICEF, the International Atomic Energy Agency, and the WHO, the World Health Organization. They are all linked to the United Nations, okay, and they group around 109 countries. They grouped at that time, in the 50s, about 190 countries that belonged to the United Nations. And the languages of the United Nations in the 50s were 5. English, French, Spanish, Russian, and Chinese. Why do you suppose these 5 languages? Why not Portuguese instead of Chinese? Why not Swahili instead of Spanish? Why not Yoruba instead of English? Yeah, they have a history as colonies. As colonizers. They have a history as successful commercial nations. They have a history as militarily, quase não sai, well-succeeded nations. Okay? Thus, they impose their language. Okay? But after World War One, the need of a lingua franca for diplomacy emerges. We had 5 lingua francas. A lot, still a lot, we have to reduce. We have to have at least have maximum 2 or 3 languages. So English will dispute with French this role as a lingua franca. And why English? Why do you think English? After World War One, we have to take this under the light of history. Industrial Revolution. Where did it take place? In England. After Industrial Revolution, England became a potency, a commercial and an industrial potency. Well, the English Empire was succeeded by the American Empire. The United States emerged as an industrial, successful nation. And the dominant language was English already. So it was very comfortable to keep this status for English. Phillipson says in page 33, what time is it? Phillipson says in page 33 that French was unchallenged as the international language of diplomacy until the peace talks at the conclusion of 1914-1918 war, when parity between English and French was agreed. Parity. We are not talking about superiority of English or French. They were both at the same level of status. But a process of dispute begins, Phillipson says, in view of the rapid expansion of English in the post-World War II period. After World War II, the United States, that capitalized the war, emerged as a potential nation. So he says, the French stepped up efforts to strengthen French internationally by the creation of appropriate bodies such as the Haut Comité pour la Défense de l'Expansion de la Langue Française and the promotion and encouragement of Francophonie. So this is a reaction. You know the third law of Newton, yeah? You know Newton, the third law of Newton. For every action there is a reaction. When English started spreading because of the success of the United States, the French, come on, we are not going to stay watching the situation. We are going to promote French. Now, why does a nation would want to promote its language? What is the interest behind promoting a language? Por que se promover uma língua? To get more power. If language is power, the more people who speak my language, the more people I'm able to influence. I'll not use the word dominate, because dominate is a little bit unfair. Fica parecendo aquelas coisas de dominados e dominadores, aquela coisa meio marxista tradicional. It's a matter of influencing, being able to influence people. When you influence, you not necessarily dominate, but you are a reference. Yeah? You are the role model. So, as we can see, while English was ascending after the war, French was trying to avoid its decline, which seemed to be inevitable in the international scenery. At this moment, we have the first economic and political unions, the European Union being the most representative. The European Union is not an invention from the 1990s. The European Union started existing right after World War II. And the United Nations, after the war, is empowered and widely recognized. So everyone who wanted international recognition entered the United Nations. And this is also true nowadays. That's why the Palestinians want to have their state officially recognized by the United Nations. Because if you are not, you cannot negotiate in trade, in diplomacy. So the United Nations gained power. And along with the United Nations, English and French kept their power, but English was ascending. Distances are shortened. And I'm not talking about globalization. But distances are shortened after World War II by certain technological inventions, such as the airplane. What else? The inventions from the 50s. The airplane, the popularity of the automobile. What else? Telephones, not cell phones. Cell phones come later. The computers, I'm talking about 1950s. Computers are from the 80s. In the 50s they did exist, but they were exclusively for military use. But let's take in the 50s, the inventions of the 50s. The TV, the plane, that was not invented in the 50s but became popular in the 50s, commercially speaking. The radio stations, okay, the development of the press, an international press. So these distances are shortened, and they are even more shortened in the 90s. But this is, let's call it the first step to globalization. Okay, we start shortening distances. And we start having a new modality of capitalism, which will develop into what we know as globalization. Okay? In the 50s, globalization starts its embryonary stage in the 1950s. Phillipson says that in European community institutions, French was de facto the dominant language until 1972. But then we had a situation that changed the thing. When Denmark, Great Britain, and Ireland joined the European community, this has serious implications for languages of smaller powers and their influence. What's the language of Britain? English. Ireland? English. Denmark? They don't speak English, they speak Danish, but they are more identified to English than to French. Their language is closer, because English is derived from those Nordic languages. So we have a tendency of reduction in the number of official languages in the United Nations, which will reinforce English as a global lingua franca. And of course, this is going to cause resistance. Who is going to resist to that? Who is going to resist to the tendency of English to become dominant? Quem que adora brigar com inglês? But for them, English as a global language is nice because they also speak English. That's brilliant. Who are the people from Europe who love to fight with the English? Não. Já ouviram falar da Guerra das Duas Rosas? França. France dominated England during medieval times. They never accepted the fact that they would become less important than England, that their language would become less important than French. The French language that was once spoken in England as the official language.
The English language, like
Yeah, in France, if you go to France and you try to speak English to communicate, some people will pretend they don't understand you. Because it's like Brazil and Argentina. Yeah? They are kind of rivals of each other. And this comes from a traumatic history of conflict, of death, of a lot of blood on both territories. Okay, as I said, England. I'm finishing in this slide today. England was dominated by France when we had the Norman invasion, a invasão normândica. Se vocês quiserem conhecer mais, procurem saber sobre a invasão normândica da Inglaterra. O inglês foi banido como língua da Inglaterra e o francês foi imposto. Obviamente, as pessoas continuaram falando inglês entre elas, na Ralezona, mas a língua oficial da Inglaterra passava a ser o francês. Até que Henrique V, nessa guerra das Duas Rosas, consegue novamente conquistar a independência da Inglaterra, se casando com a então herdeira do trono da França. E aí ele inverte a situação. Ele de origem inglesa. Se vocês puderem, assistam o filme Henrique V, que é baseado na peça Henrique V do Shakespeare. Tá? E aí vocês vão entender um pouco dessa guerra. Então, just to finish, we are then, after World War II, in a process in which French is weakened, English is rising, and France starts developing research on applied linguistics. E o que pesquisa em linguística aplicada tem a ver com a perda de prestígio da França e da sua língua? France. The first ones to invest in applied linguistics are the French, because they want to resist to the dominance. So they develop methodologies for teaching the French language. E aí, não sei se vocês lembram, uma vez eu disse a vocês, o capital, ele não combate, ele compra. O que os ingleses e os americanos fizeram? Se apropriaram das pesquisas em linguística aplicada, leram muito bem essas pesquisas e implementaram também para eles. E aí houve uma guerra, durante muito tempo, entre aprender inglês ou francês, qual era mais importante, e aí acabavam em algumas nações periféricas, eu aprender os dois. No fim, os dois saíam lucrando. Como hoje a gente vive um dilema muito grande. Which English am I to learn? American or British English? Na verdade, os dois lucram com isso. Tanto a editora Oxford lucra com isso, vendendo materiais de inglês britânico, quanto as editoras americanas lucram vendendo material de inglês americano, e no fundo, o que a gente vai falar é um pouquinho melhorado o inglês do Joel Santana. Claro, com a gramática legal e tal, mas carregado da nossa identidade, do nosso sotaque, e isso não é desaconselhável, pelo contrário, é aconselhável. Eu acho que é o mínimo de direito que a gente tem sobre uma língua, já que a gente não pode escolher que língua, pelo menos vamos escolher como falar essa língua. Não estou fazendo apologia aqui do falar pouco, mas eu estou fazendo sim a defesa da não paranoia pelo sotaque do nativo. Sem paranoia. Porque no fundo, nós nunca vamos falar como os caras. Porque eles também nunca falaram como a gente. Tá aí o Papa Chiquinho, tá aí. Falou um português bacana, todo mundo entendeu. Mas você percebe o sotaque de argentino. E qual o problema? O cara é argentino, né? Mas eu vou deixar essa discussão para a gente seguir na segunda-feira, que eu espero poder terminar o curso, mas se eu não conseguir, eu ainda vou gravar mais uma aula, né? De modo que a gente possa terminar de discutir o Phillipson. Hoje eu queria passar 7 slides, consegui passar 3. Lindo.